Before we get into the question of vertical integration, which is what this set of videos is all about, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the IT industry, really to help with your case, but also because we're going to use some of the ideas and the value system, which we'll define shortly, in the IT industry in this set of videos. So let me give you a quick background on the evolution of the IT industry. For those of you in the IT industry, I apologize for significantly overly simplifying this. But for those of you not in the IT industry, this will give you a kind of a good understanding of where things currently are and how really the business model has changed over time. So most of you that don't have a background with IT, all you really know is the app side of things or the application side of things. So you are used to programs that you interact with, whether it's an actual program like Excel, whether it's, for instance, PeopleSoft in your company where you actually put in your hours and do really most of your HR functionality. On the supply chain side, whether it's something like SAP. But the key is you're used to hitting an app and really doing what you need to do. But if you think about it, there's two major pieces that go into even that app itself. And the first piece is the software that actually stores the data. So when you actually go into an app, it's pulling data from somewhere, and that somewhere is a database, which is just nothing more than software that manages the data. And the other piece is a software that actually runs this app. So we'll talk briefly about this in a second. But this software could be on, for instance, your computer itself, but it could also be on another server somewhere. And all it's doing is sending you basically what you see on the screen, but not doing any of the work behind the scenes. Okay, so if you're accessing something through, for instance, a browser, this is effectively what's happening. It's pulling data from a database software. And on top of that, what you actually see is being generated by a server somewhere. Okay, if you think about the parts that additionally are necessary to go into this, the first is the development system in which the program or app is actually created or customized. So this software here that's pushing what you see on your phone or your laptop or whatever you're on, that itself needs to be developed somewhere. And so this needs to be part of this IT ecosystem. And then lastly, all of these pieces of software, they have to be running on a physical server somewhere. So basically, a computer somewhere has to actually be holding this software. And so these are all the elements that go into really making an app or making a program that you use. No matter where these things are stored, they have to be somewhere. And what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through what different forms of that can look like. And really the big thing that's changed in the IT industry in the last 20 years, especially with the advent of the cloud, is just where these individual elements are stored. It's nothing more than that. It's just a change in business model by moving these into different places. And we'll see what we mean. That said, one thing I want to be clear is that this decision on really what you want to have at each part of your value chain. So in other words, which parts of these you as a company want to focus on, and how this process actually works, it's nothing unique to IT. It might seem that way, but for those of you that are new to IT, I really want to make sure that you understand this is basically the same question that businesses that actually produce tangible objects, the same decisions are made here that need to be made there. Just the context is a little bit different. But to make this more clear, instead of creating an app that a user is interacting with, let's think about creating an ice cream cone that a user is interacting with. So again, what we're trying to do here is set up the analogy that the IT industry might seem idiosyncratic, but at its core, it's still just a question of which parts of the value system does a company want to focus on. So where the analogy is here is that in an actual app, that's what the user is going to interact with, and that's what they need to interact with. Well, here, same thing. An ice cream cone, the physical product, is what the end user is ultimately going to interact with. So now the question is, what's the analogy for everything else? So in terms of the software that runs the program or app, this is going to be the ice cream machine, the thing that actually makes what customers interact with. So the analogy to software that runs a program app is ice cream machine, and the analogy to software that stores the data is going to be the menu. that exists in the store. So here's basically all the information we have, and together with the software that runs the app, we can produce this series of things, in this case ice cream cones, that users want to interact with. Okay, so what would the development system be in which this is created? Well, it's going to be the tools that actually make this machine. Again, in an IT world, it's just the programming tools that make the ultimate software. Well, here would be the physical machine shop tools that ultimately make this machine. All right, so the last piece here is where these things are physically stored. Again, in the IT world, they are physically stored on a computer somewhere, but in the real world, if you think about it, your menus are going to be stored in a little menu holder. The actual ice cream machine itself is going to be stored in an ice cream shop, and the actual things like lathes and other materials you need to make ice cream machines, I'm assuming you need a lathe, will be stored in a machine shop somewhere. And really what we're going to see is, as we talk about the evolution of the IT industry, we're going to talk about what that would look like in this industry as well, just to make it a little bit more concrete for those of you that don't really have any IT background. Okay, with that, let's talk about where IT, kind of what you're used to, just to give you an idea of how these parts go together. And in particular, think about Excel, so the program Excel. If you think about who owns all these different parts here. Well, when you're running Excel, the only way you can run it is if you actually own basically a laptop or a desktop. So the hardware that houses the data software, which is Excel, the program and app software, which is also Excel, and the development system, if we assume we're talking about the ability to customize Excel, you have to own all of this. And in particular, this is all just going to be, for instance, your laptop. Okay, so with Excel, all of these components are on your laptop. Microsoft then takes care of the rest. This is Excel. Then what Excel gives you is it gives you the actual interface, which is what you're used to with Excel. It actually stores data. You don't see that. Well, let me take that back. You see it displayed on the screen, but how the data is actually stored, you don't see. But that is actually on your computer, how and where the data is stored. The software that runs the program and app, this is actually the executable file that's running on your machine. And then the development system, again, if we consider Excel itself, the ability to customize, the ability to do things like Visual Basic in Excel, then that's also in Excel. So the business model of Excel is that you have to own this part of this system. Excel, when you purchase it, is giving you the rest. This is what you're purchasing when you're purchasing Excel. And what we're going to see in the history of IT is just where these bundles of things, so in Excel's case, it's all of these, where these bundles exist, it's moved and it's changed. So before we do that, to relate what Excel would be in our ice cream example, it would be the situation where you, for some reason, own all the stores and, for instance, the menu holders. So basically, you own real estate. And then someone else owns everything that is related to ice cream, or you have to purchase that. So this would be something like an ice cream, I don't even know what we're going to call it, specialist. And basically what happens is you own the real estate, and then you pay the ice cream specialist to come in and do everything else relating to the ice cream. Is all you do is store the physical locations, or you own the physical locations. They do everything else. That's the equivalent of Excel in our example. Okay, so let's go to the history of IT in a very brief form. So before the cloud, how IT generally existed, and this was 80s and 90s for the most part, is that companies pretty much owned these pieces. And so this is going to be the infrastructure or the architecture, either one. You'll hear different terms. This is the IT infrastructure that companies would need to have to run an enterprise-wide application. Basically, they would need to house the servers, they would need to own the servers that not only hold the databases, also the application software, but also the development system. In a nutshell, they would need a server farm. They would have to have server experts, network experts. They would have to have all that in-house. On top of that, they would generally have to buy a database from Oracle or SQL Server or DB2, or there's a bunch of software, database softwares out there. They would own that as well. So this they would basically buy from someone and they would own. Then what the actual software companies would do is they would basically sell these components. And so this is where a lot of the money was in the 80s and 90s, was selling specific ERPs, so enterprise-wide packages or software that let you do things like supply chain, that let you do things like HR, and then obviously the app itself that people interact with. And then also where the money was actually developing these systems, so customizing the software so it was exactly what a particular customer wanted. And this is where the consulting firms lived. And this is why in the 90s you would see the consulting firms just hiring just at a massive rate because there was so much need for this. So again, a huge amount of the money wasn't here by the time you got to the 90s, but a lot of the money was in the software itself when you looked at these really large enterprise-wide systems, and then also on the consulting side that actually customized these for particular clients. Okay, in the ice cream example, what that would mean is this is equivalent to a setup where, again, companies would own all the physical pieces plus the menu. They would then purchase from the equivalent of a software company the tools to actually make ice cream. And then consultants would come in and customize those tools to give them exactly what they wanted. So again, there's still a lot of overhead because they would need to own all of this. But you could still break out these pieces, you could absolutely do this, where once you own the hardware, you could hire someone to actually produce the app or the ice cream cone in this case, and the machine that makes that for you. And then you could hire someone to make sure this gives you all the flavors you wanted, for instance. And again, the money would have been here and here. There wouldn't be a whole lot of money in actually selling real estate in that case. And that's exactly what we saw. So that was before the cloud. Okay, in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, that's when this thing called the cloud came up. I want to say that the name originally came out around 2006, but the idea on this distributed computing idea was really from the early 2000s. And the idea was this: all of these pieces, you don't really need to have them together. Anyone can own them. And more importantly, you as a company don't have to own certain pieces. You can buy or rent all of these from people. Remember, before with everything we looked at, you had to own all of these components, which was a huge upfront cost for companies, especially small companies. And so once computing power got good enough and once networking got good enough, it was recognized that, maybe you can't afford to purchase a large server farm, but maybe you could, for instance, rent part of a much larger server farm. And so now suddenly you can have access to effectively hardware that you don't own. You're basically renting it from one vendor. You can have hardware from another vendor and another vendor. And this is basically what Amazon Web Services. Software, again, you can rent. All of this is basically what it does for firms, and why firms liked it so much is they no longer have to have this huge upfront cost of having the infrastructure and hiring people to really be computer experts when that's not what their ultimate business was. They just use this to facilitate their business. So that was the advent of the cloud. The idea that because computing power and networking has gotten so good, you can effectively tap into these larger systems online instead of holding it in-house. And then the question is, how do we want to bundle these together in a way that really is good for us as a software vendor and good for you as a customer? And this is what the evolution has been. This is what we've seen in the last 15 years. So the first way to bundle it that's really common is known as software as a service. And the idea here is that you, as the company that's trying to purchase the IT pieces, the only thing you really own, it's not even owning in a lot of cases, it's renting. It's you're renting the ability to use this program or app. That's it. So anytime you have something, Salesforce is one of the first companies that did this really well. If you ever use Salesforce, basically you pay on a per license per month basis. And what you get is access to this app. And you can customize it in certain ways. But the key to this and why it's so useful for so many companies is that everything else you don't have to own. So the way something like Salesforce works is, again, you can sign up in a matter of minutes. You now have access to this app, and everything else is effectively hidden from you, and hidden in a good way that you don't have to worry about it. Salesforce takes care of all the databases. There is some ability to customize what you see, but other than that, you don't have really any upfront costs, and that is huge for especially small to mid-sized companies. But even large companies, they don't have to worry about tying up their capital in huge amounts of hardware and networking teams and infrastructure teams, because they can just access this. So one of the ways that the cloud has really transformed this industry is this software as a service, and the money here obviously is here. All the money when you pay into Salesforce is basically then going into Salesforce. There is some consulting you can purchase here to help customize your particular app, so there's a bit of money here, but a majority of it is because these are put together in such a way that it's really usable for customers. So that's one model that we've seen. Another, and in our ice cream example, this is what it would look like, where this would look something like you're just paying for some amount of ice cream per month, and that's it. You just walk in, you get the ice cream you want, and you leave, and you don't care about what's going on behind the scenes. And if you think about why that's so, for you as a customer, so important, you never wanted to own the ice cream shop to begin with. You never wanted to own the machine shop to begin with. All you wanted was ice cream. That's all you cared about. So software as a service is essentially the natural progression that we see we see customers want. They just want to purchase and deal with that thing they care about. Everything else, they just want it done. And this allows that to happen. Okay, the other model that we've seen is not software as a service, but instead platform as a service. And what platform as a service does is it doesn't actually sell you an end application or an end app or an end program. Instead, what it does is it actually gives you the ability to make your own, and it gives a lot of people the ability to make your own. So it effectively makes an online development platform. What you oftentimes see is that companies, they'll actually have their own database. Not necessarily. You can absolutely have a platform as a service where the database is on there as well, but it's not uncommon that the database will either be owned or at least managed by the company itself. And then what it'll do is it'll basically rent this development platform. So everything that is necessary to create an app that they want. So this is where effectively Yonyou lives, as they have created this development app that is really key to their type of software. So that management software, those ERP softwares that we see so many companies use. And the development environment is specifically made so that you can make these apps easily. And that's a big deal, because that means now that individual firms can get exactly what they want. And on top of that, you can have a lot of different people making a lot of different kinds of apps for really any type of customer, all of it on the same platform. So once you have this, then what firms will do is they'll then create the programs that they want to see, but it's all going to be built using this platform. And again, whether the software exists within the platform, or whether the database exists within the platform, or whether it exists just the company owns it, doesn't really matter for this. The key is, if you think about where the money's going to be, the money's going to be here on the platform side. There's also going to be money on the development side. And this is, again, consulting is going to play a big role here. However, there is the role for more contract work, so more small jobs, because again, development has become so much easier because of this platform. So where the value really comes in is if you can have a distribution channel such that there are a lot of people making a lot of apps for a lot of people. That's when you get a good part of the money. And the actual competition here on a lot of people making apps starts driving this money down. And so that's the idea behind platform as a service. You don't need to have the entire development platform in-house when all you want is the app. Instead, you can basically rent the ability to make something you want and then make it. So the equivalent here would be basically, if, again, you own the menus, that's fine. But you could rent out the ability to make ice cream machines. And then you can make whatever ice cream machine you want. It can produce whatever flavor you want, but you get to decide these. You get to choose these. And if you have enough, individuals that want different customization here and want to make this really easy, if you can make the process of building this machine very easy and very modular, a lot of people would pay for that service. And that's exactly what Platform as a Service has. So that's it. That's the IT world in a nutshell. Anytime you hear the word cloud and you wonder what it is, it's I remember when I first heard it, I actually called someone I used to work with and said, "Was that basically what we were doing?" And the answer is, "Yep." All it is just distributing these servers and effectively renting space instead of owning it. That's the cloud. Nothing more, nothing less than that. And the software as a service and platform as a service is just a way to bundle these together in different ways. That's the same way that we see bundling on product markets, is you decide which of these components work together and then sell them as a unit, and you ultimately try to go to where the money is going to be. And in Yonyou's case, they moved here feeling that the money was here because the consultants were effectively squeezing profits on this end. So here they can hold most of the money, and we'll talk more about that when we talk iteration. But this is ultimately what we're talking about in the IT world.